I'm really, really pleased. This session was really important to me. When we decided to put this day together, we knew that we needed to get someone who didn't work for Airbnb to come in and talk to us about Irish hospitality. We here in the company, and I'm sure a lot of you as hosts, talk a lot about what Irish hospitality is. And I thought maybe it would be an exciting thing to do to get an expert to come in and actually explain to us what that really means. So I'm really, really pleased that we've got Simon O'Connor here. Come on over. He is co-founder of the Little Museum of Dublin and the City of a Thousand Welcomes, and I'm going to let him explain to you what both of those things are.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I feel a bit weird with this microphone on. I don't know if I look like a motivational speaker or Madonna during the Blonde Ambition tour. But this is it's an amazing building to be in, actually. I remember reading that when President John F. Kennedy addressed our government in Leinster House in 1963, he made the slight gaffe by saying that the architecture of Leinster House had never inspired great ideas. But thankfully, this building has inspired lots of great ideas in its past. I believe you were hearing something about that earlier on, and it's a great place to be in. It's great that Airbnb have set up here. I work in the Little Museum of Dublin, which I co-founded with a friend of mine, Trevor White. And at the same time, when we set that museum up, we also founded a hospitality service called City of a Thousand Welcomes, which I think actually shares an awful lot in common with the ethos of Airbnb. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. I was introduced as an expert on hospitality. I'm more probably like everybody else in this room. I think we're all actually experts in hospitality. I think it's in our DNA in Ireland. And I think we are the friendliest people in the world. But I also think we're very awkward about that. And I want to kind of, if you'll humor me, I'd like you to kind of be involved in a very brief experiment where I can illuminate that for you. So if you wouldn't mind all maybe standing up for a second, if that's okay. This is the right one, is it? Now, let's see. And if you wouldn't, I apologize in advance for this. If you wouldn't mind turning to the person next to you and giving them a really big hug, okay? Don't hug them for too long. That's fine. You can all stop now. Is that the kind of thing they do? That's really embarrassing for me then. You can all sit down. Thanks a lot. I'm sure for some of you that felt like that bit in mass when you were a kid, when they asked you to turn around and shake the hand of a stranger, and you were like, oh God, and then you did it, and then it felt fine. Because I think as Irish people, we're actually quite cynical sometimes about our reputation as being friendly, because we're kind of cynical at heart, you know. But in actual fact, we are the friendliest people in the world. We have this reputation as the most welcoming people in the world. And I'm going to give you, I suppose, a tiny little bit of an historical background to why I think that might be the case. So the roots of Irish hospitality, the roots go way back to the Brehon Laws, which were these kind of early medieval laws that governed many aspects of life in Ireland. And in one area in particular, they were very specific about hospitality. It was expected that people would welcome strangers into their houses, that they would give them food, they would give them drink, they would exchange stories, they would exchange poetry, they wouldn't ask any awkward or prying questions. And this is where we can forget about the Brehon Laws. No payment was asked for. And they're connected in a way to, I think, to the ancient Greek laws of hospitality. Although the ancient Greek laws went a bit further, you would have to give them like new clothes and all kinds of things. But those laws existed, and it's interesting that if you didn't subscribe to that principle of hospitality. If a stranger turned up at your house and you didn't kind of go through this whole process, you could be fined right now. I mean, thankfully, that's not the situation today. But that was going on in this country for since the early medieval period. It extends in a way up into the 20th century when in the Gaeltacht areas around the west of Ireland, the phenomenon of the ban on tea occurred, where basically houses were being opened up in places like Connemara to students who wanted to learn about the Irish language and who wanted to study Irish. And the women of the houses became the kind of principal managers of this service. And it was an amazing thing for students. It would, how many people went to the Gaeltacht, actually? How many people had their first kiss in the Gaeltacht? Right? Yeah, it was like a Petri dish for teenagers. But it became actually a really important source of income for the families and for the women in these areas. And I think that's actually really relevant in relation to what Airbnb is doing, because it's quite similar. People are opening up their homes, and it's providing them with very genuinely important sources of income, and it's using their home as a resource. So that situation has been there, and a lot of us, like all those hands that went up, we've all actually experienced that, going in, having to speak their language, having to eat whatever it was that the ban on tea would put out in the morning for us. But the idea of, I suppose, the idea of Irish friendliness and hospitality is something that the country, and at least the powers that be in the country, have been aware of for a very long time and have promoted. And ever since the 1930s, De Valera pushed forward this image of Ireland, which was, I suppose, decidedly rural and idyllic, and it presented a culture that was very gentle. It was a culture of very pleasant, open people, a culture that was full of music and dance and drinking and fun and enjoyment. And that image traveled all over the world. In the mid 20th century, there was a really interesting group of European graphic designers came to Ireland from Holland and from Germany to live here, to live in this idyllic paradise, which was what was being sold around the world. And a lot of them got involved with the fledgling tourism body at the time, Fógra Fáilte, which eventually became Bord Fáilte, and they contributed to sending out around the world their own kind of beautiful imaginings of what Ireland was and what it was like to live here. And also, Ireland is a place, we're a small island, and we have always created far more children than we can provide for. So emigration has always been a really core part of the Irish story. It's a central part of the Irish narrative. And we have, I suppose, acute moments in history where that becomes really profound, like the Great Hunger in the second half of the 20th century, or the 19th century, the last Great Recession in the 1980s, the current recession that we're in at the moment. We see an awful lot of emigration. But what that does for Ireland is it creates a world full of people and descendants who want to come back to Ireland, and they want to come back to Ireland to find their family. And when they come here, that's what they expect to find. They expect to find long-lost connections. They expect to find people who will treat them as distant cousins who've arrived back. And in the main, unsurprisingly, that is what they get. And I see it every single day working in the little museum. We run a hospitality initiative, I suppose what you'd call a boutique hospitality service called City of 1,000 Welcomes. And like most good things in Ireland, the idea for it was hatched over a couple of pints in a boozer. A friend of mine, Trevor White, who set up the museum and the service with me, he was in the Swan Lounge on Ainger Street. Has anyone been to the Swan Lounge on Ainger Street? I was cycling past it a while ago with my daughter, and my 7-year-old daughter, and I was cycling past, and I was pointing out buildings to her, and I said, "Oh, that's the Swan. That's my favorite pub in Ireland." And she shouts out from the back of the bike. She goes, "Daddy, all the pubs in Ireland are your favorite pub in Ireland." But anyway, sorry, that's an aside. Trevor was sitting in the Swan having a pint with a friend of his, and an Australian tourist came in and just sat down at the bar beside them. He was staying in a hostel across the road. He was traveling on his own, and they got into a conversation. And Trevor and his friend bought the guy a pint, started finding out what his interests were, started, getting the measure of him, and they started basically giving him really personal advice. And these are two, I mean, Trevor and his friend Killian, I suppose you'd classify them as like cranky, worldly intellectuals who are not afraid to speak their mind, right? So they're kind of giving him their whole vision of Dublin and what he should do while he's here. And he went off completely delighted with himself. And they walked home, obviously having had far too many drinks, thinking to themselves, right, what if this was a service that Dubliners could sign up to and they could volunteer to do it? And then they kind of pushed it a step further and they said, well, what if we got other people to pay for the drinks? And then he called me and he said, how the hell are we going to do this? And I thought he was completely mad. But 2010, this was in 2010, and 2010, if anyone can remember back that far, was a very, very different kind of psychological moment for us here in Ireland. It was a very depressing period of time. A psychologist friend of mine told me recently that she was actually saying to her patients, advising them not to listen to the news, because most of the new patients she had coming in, she said, how much do you listen to the news? And they said, oh, I listen to it all the time, every day. And they said, right, stop, that's the first problem. It was just unrelentingly grim. But there was another interesting story going on that wasn't in the media, which was that volunteerism was growing really dramatically at the time, and people were engaging in really, really interesting projects. I mean, even in this building alone, like that would have been a perfect example of one of the interesting things when it was Mabos around that time, things that were starting to happen in Dublin. Dublin was turning itself around. And I suppose that idea of, that Airbnb is part of, that idea of the sharing economy was just starting to occur. And when Trevor had said to me, let's get involved in this project, I thought, this is totally nuts, like how are we going to do it? He went off and he did some research. And he found from one of Fáilte Ireland's exit surveys that they do on tourists as they leave the country, he found that the main reason for them coming to Ireland was the parks, the scenery, not the weather, obviously. But the reason that they all said, practically all of them said that would make them come back, was the friendliness of the people. 94% of tourists, of visitors to this country, when leaving, said that it was the welcome that they got from Irish people that would make them come back and that would make them tell other people to come here. So not the Book of Kells, not the Great Lakes in Killarney, all of us, which is kind of, feels weird because, we're cynical about that kind of thing. Actually, one of my favorite writers, Brendan Behan, said that it's not that the Irish are cynical, it's rather that they have a wonderful lack of respect for everything and everybody. But I was completely wrong about Trevor's idea, because when we launched it, the public reaction was really, really significant. It got picked up by news organizations all over the world. Within 2 weeks, we had hoped to have 1,000 volunteers in the space of 6 months. Within 2 weeks, we had 2,500 volunteers. The service became full immediately. It remains full. We still run it as a very small service in the museum, and we have volunteers coming in day after day, and they bring tourists off for an hour, and we just basically say to them, welcome them to Dublin. And they bring them off for an hour to either a cafe or a bar, and they chat to them. And it's very, very simple. They're not allowed to upsell anything. It's entirely non-commercial. We've resisted, there have been lots of opportunities to make it commercial, but we've resisted that because we see the looks on their faces when we don't even allow them to give the volunteers tips. And they're like, really? No, but and then what's the catch? And you're like, there's no catch. This is a civic service. So a core part of the philosophy of it is also about civic pride and social engagement. And I think, looking through the reports that Airbnb have done on their activities in Ireland, I think that's, to me anyway, personally, I think that's one of the most interesting things that comes out of that, is the effect that hosting appears to be having on hosts' attitudes to their own society and to the places that they live in, that it's actually kind of making them engage more with the places that they live in and appreciate more what's all around them. So we send them off. We send the tourists off with a volunteer. This is me. I know I look hammered there. I hadn't had anything to drink at that point. But we bring them off and basically spend an hour chatting with them. And it's not, I mean, sometimes it's, okay, you want to go to the Book of Kells, you want to go to this, or you want to go to that. But I think the best meetings are always when they go totally off course and you end up in like really heated debates about, you know, Donald Trump and the American primaries, or, you know, you kind of, there was one time actually where I had these two old ladies who were like completely dripping in diamonds and jewelry, and I brought them off, you know, and they're from Texas, and I was like, oh my God, what have I let myself in for? And I kind of can't help but talk about politics to American tourists, and immediately as the conversation started, they turned around and they were like, well, you know, we need to be a lot more communist in our country. And it was amazing. We had this great rapport then for an hour, and they walked away. They wrote an amazing review on TripAdvisor. They couldn't believe that they were getting to have this kind of wild conversation with this total stranger in Dublin. And a lot of our volunteers do that. Although they're supposed to just go for an hour, they sometimes bring them back to their houses. They spend the whole day with them. Friendships have struck up, and they go visit them in their own countries. We haven't had any marriages yet that I know of. But it has, I suppose, the service has an authenticity that is really, really valuable. And the Sydney Morning Herald referred to it as the best free thing to do in Europe, which kind of amazed us. But I still, as a cynic, I was like, I don't believe it's the best free thing to do in Europe. But tourists send us cards, they send us presents afterwards, because it's that single bit of interaction that they have with someone, and it's so unexpected that they describe it as the best thing that they did on their whole trip. Now, when we set this service up, we were at the same time setting up this little museum, and we didn't have anything to put on display, which was a bit of a problem. But we had two lovely rooms in an old Georgian house on St. Stephen's Green, and we decided to crowdsource the museum. We basically had a public appeal for donations, and people from all over Dublin came in with amazing things. And within 4 months, we had this, like City of 1,000 Welcomes, we had this small little boutique thing going on that the public were involved in. And for us, we thought, you know, well, how do we compete? How do we compete with the bigger museums? How do we compete with the National Museum and things like that? And the answer, I suppose, was staring us right in the face with what we had done with City of 1,000 Welcomes. We could compete not in terms of artifacts or, like, you know, the Derry na Flan chalice or something like that. We could compete with just really small things like hospitality, customer service, personal experience, stuff that you would never expect to actually happen in a museum. So if you think about, I suppose if you think about the comparison between, if you think of the National Museum, say, as the five-star hotel, and then you think of the Little Museum as the Airbnb house, the things that we knew we were able to compete with the kind of Goliaths on was we had control over tiny details. So we could make things like we could make sure that we had staff members to walk visitors around, to talk to them all the time. Stuff that would be, say, inconceivable for a very, very big organization. It would just be too unwieldy administratively to do it. We were able to create bespoke experiences quite simply because we were a small museum. And we had a very, very dedicated, passionate staff. And also something that was really interesting was that it was all down to us. There was no red tape. We were completely in charge of what we did for visitors when they came into the museum. We were totally in charge of the experience. And if we wanted to change something, we could change it literally straight away. We could have an idea and we could run with it. We could run with it the next day. Now today we have, I suppose we're getting nearly a third of the amount of visitors that the National Museum gets, and we've had to put a cap on the visitors because we have too many people coming into the museum, which is great. And then we were voted the the #1 museum in Ireland on TripAdvisor last year, and it's not because the collection is the collection that you simply have to go and see. It's because the way that history is taught to people in the museum is kind of infectious for visitors when they come in, and they walk out even after 30 minutes going, "Oh my God, like I've never been to a museum like that." And that was people who weren't museum experts setting that up. We were just punters like everyone, in the room. I suppose the core of it for us was to try and create real experiences. We looked at the typical experience that you have in a museum when you walk in and you look at a glass case and there's a guy at the counter and he's just kind of going, "Yeah, in you go," and you might be eating like a breakfast roll or something, and then you go in and you read a load of stuff and you walk out, and you could have a terrible experience or you could have an amazing experience, and no one in the museum would really know what happened. And we decided we'd upend that, so we would only have museum staff show everyone around. We would try and have Dubliners get really involved in it. So often on our tours, Dubliners, we kind of have it set up so they're allowed to butt in, and they're allowed to correct us, and they're allowed to give out to us. And then all the tourists think this is absolutely amazing. And the whole thing of history, which face it, like a lot of people who end up in museums are often, they don't want to be there. They're there with their partner who really wants to go. But suddenly they're really involved, and they're going off then, writing really good reviews. I suppose, when it seems like it's a kind of a customer service principle, it's a real thing. It creates real outcomes for us, in terms of educating people when they come into the place. Another reason, I suppose, though, to take the analogy of this over to hosting, that aside from kind of making the world a better place and opening your houses and having people come in and having lovely experiences, another reason to stay very involved with it, I suppose, is the fact that there's a major tourist boom in Ireland at the moment, and this year so far, there's been an 18% rise in visitors to Ireland on last year, and last year there was a 17% rise on the year before. So there's a very, very significant thing going on in practical financial terms for any of us who are involved in visitors coming into the country. Now, Fáilte Ireland and Tourism Ireland have been doing a huge amount of work in bringing those visitors to the country. It's kind of interesting when you look at their tactics. The image of the tourist in Ireland is typically of a North American, but the vast majority of tourists that come to this country are from the UK, and that's very deliberate. During the boom years, we lost most of the UK visitors. During the recession, we lost most of them. So there's been a significant drive to pull those visitors back. And last year, UK tourists accounted for about 40%, just over 40% of visitors to Ireland. So between the UK and the North Americans, they account for 65% of all visitors who come. The visitors that this big tourism drive are trying to bring into the country are the types of visitors that I think all of us want to have. They're young, energetic. They're not necessarily interested in drinking. They're not here for the hen party or the stag party. They're here for lots of outdoor stuff. They have in Fáilte Ireland a name for it. They call them social energizers. But it's an interesting thing. They're coming over for 2 or 3 days. And they're ideally suited to what we're doing in the museum. I think they're ideally suited to what you guys are doing. And also they speak our language. They get our jokes. They get the nuance of the culture. And they can go away and they can evangelize about what we're doing. And while the demand, I suppose, increases all the time in the city, I think Airbnb is very important what it's doing, because hotels react to demand in a very, very simple way. They increase their prices. And it has taken a long time for Ireland to get back to the point where we can say we are value for money to visitors. And in the city, that's gradually going to come under attack, because the more demand, the more those amazing tourist increase numbers keep coming, the more the hotel prices are going to start coming up, and the more important it is that people are hosting and opening up their houses for people to come and have those kinds of experiences, real experiences. when we were devising City of a Thousand Welcomes, we had a few guiding principles which I'll share with you. I think they might be of interest. I suppose the first was that we wanted visitors to experience what we felt were the best of locally owned businesses. So we weren't interested when we said, where will they go for a cup of tea or coffee or a pint? We didn't want them to go to Starbucks. You know, we thought, no, they have to go to somewhere that's locally owned. And what's the best that could accommodate lots of visitors going that might buy into it? So we send them to Bewley's for a cup of tea or coffee. We send them to the Marion Hotel, which is Irish owned, for a cup of tea or coffee, and we send them to the Porterhouse for a pint of craft beer. So it's kind of they get this really authentic thing that's not necessarily about something that's luxurious. It's just about something that's local, and that's here. I mentioned that we ask our volunteers to simply welcome the visitors to Dublin. Just to talk to them, find out what they're interested in, to try and make a connection with them. I think it's really interesting when you do that because visitors start out, they start asking you about things like the economy and the crash and the boom and the recession, and I think that's great when that happens because they start realizing that there are all these commonalities, and they start to feel at home when they're away from home, which I think is kind of one of the essences of hospitality. I actually hate this phrase, shared collective experience. I shouldn't have put it there. I think that basically means a very, very simple conversation. But it is simple conversations like that visitors don't necessarily get in other countries, and it's something that we're kind of over-equipped to do. It's very difficult to get Irish people to stop talking once they start. As you're not going to find out with me because I'm going to be finishing up pretty soon. Now we're not reinventing the wheel really. When we started City of a Thousand Welcomes, we thought we were the cleverest people in the world, when it was when it had all of this media coverage. We thought, oh, isn't that fantastic? We've made this amazing thing and it's so unique. And then these people from New York City got in touch with us. They're called the Big Apple Greeters. And they said, oh, well done. You've joined the international greeting service community. And we realized, oh yeah, this is actually happening all over the world. These kinds of services, not unsurprisingly, Dublin was the only place where we had involved alcohol in it. But it is actually happening. It is actually happening all over the place. And I think Airbnb is doing the same thing. It's just on really quite an enormous scale. By bringing people into people's homes for those local experiences. And I think what it all tells us, this shift in what really appeals to visitors, is that visitors are interested in us. So they plan their trips based on stuff that they're going to go and see, but really what makes their entire visit is the people that they meet when they get here. And they love the personal touches that we provide in the service. I remember one time meeting a chap, bringing him off for a pint, and in the course of the conversation, it transpired that he was a jogger. So we took out his map, and rather than telling him about, oh, you should go to this place for dinner, and then go to that place for a pint, and oh, you're interested in Irish music, they all say that they're really interested. It's funny, when you say, what are you interested in doing on your holiday? Say, oh, well, I'd like to go somewhere to drink Guinness, and then I'd like to go to see some Irish traditional music, and it's like when we go away on holiday ourselves, I'm interested in galleries and museums, and that's not necessarily what we're interested in. It's what we think we should be interested in when we're away. But this guy, it transpired, was really interested in jogging. We took out a map and we spent an hour working out a really, really scenic jogging route for him to do for the entire week. And it took an hour. And he was delighted. He sent presents afterwards. He had the best holiday that he could have imagined in Dublin, because we just sent him running up and down from Clontarf to Howth and up Howth Head, But it was simple, and he would never have got that. He would never have got that in a guidebook. So doing things like that, helping people with their itineraries, finding out what it is that they really like, that's something that I think is really important about what we do. And it's actually really, really simple to do it. I mean, I think, speaking about guidebooks, I think, publishing is an industry. I used to work in publishing for a very long time, and like any industry, it can be very, very lazy, and people can rehash the same things over and over again with little updates. But I think all the guidebooks, they tend to miss so many things that are amazing, particularly in smaller communities and rural communities, and even in the kind of urban areas outside the city centres where it's easy for guidebook travel writers to figure out stuff. And I think in Ireland we have so much more to offer than more queues for tourists, more kind of like fake Irish dancing, more overpriced pints. We have all of these amazing things in our villages, in our towns, even in our urban environments where we're living, even in our housing estates. And we should be proud, I think, of this amazing, beautiful little country that we live in. It's full of exceptional people who are unflinchingly optimistic, friendly, and famous around the world, whether we like it or not, for our hospitality. And I think that the magical things that visitors can do when they get here, all of the hidden places that they can go, these are all of the things that the guidebooks don't know about, but they're all the things that you guys do. Thanks.
So we wanted to bring you guys here together for a number of reasons, but one of them is we wanted to thank you by giving you hopefully some things for you. So I was kind of joking, this gets to be like my Oprah moment, when Oprah does that stuff where she gets to give stuff away. It's not going to be that exciting, so like lower your expectations a little bit, but I am going to give away a few things. Say again? Yeah, Ryan Tuberty. Yeah, there we go, in Irish context. I'm a dual citizen, so I have stories from both sides. Okay, so I've got just 4 little announcements, some you've already heard. You heard from Natasha, our policy manager, about Airbnb Action. If you haven't gotten a chance to sign up, please do. Share Ireland and Airbnb Action are going to form a huge part of work that we can all do together over the next few years. Next is a bit of a preview. So the first ever Airbnb Irish Host Awards are this evening. Many of you in this room have been nominated. Many of you have nominated someone else. More is to come. You're going to be back here with Alice Vaughan. Who in this room has met Alice? Right? The amazing Alice Vaughan. She's our community manager. We're so psyched to have her here today. I don't know where she went. She's up there. There's Alice for you. She's our amazing community manager, and she's been looking after so many of the details today, and the Host Awards are kind of her gift to you, so I'm looking forward to it. Next, it says the word tax, and no one's yelling, and everything's fine. It's so exciting. We know, we were kind of having a joke this morning that, the old saying is there are 2 things in life that are guaranteed, death and taxes. We changed the rules for Airbnb. There are 2 things that are guaranteed. It was probably going to rain today, right? And the tax session was going to be too full. Yeah? Did we got it right? So we kind of knew that was going to happen. So what we wanted to do is just make tax a little bit more understandable for you, to give you more information, and to make it easier for you to feel confident about what tax as an Airbnb host is really like in Ireland. And so the result of that is a new partnership that we're very proud of. We have partnered with taxback.com, who are an Irish-owned company with offices in Dublin and Kilkenny. They've got over 1,000 employees around the world. They have created a new home for Airbnb hosts on their website. So if you go to taxback.com/Airbnb, what you're going to find is information geared directly at you, as well as information about a discounted offer. So for €280, you guys will be able to work with TaxBack to do a personal tax return. The details of that, terms and conditions, all of that stuff is on the site, but just know that we're really proud of that because it allows us to give you a resource that you can go to, and I hope that you guys are as interested in that as we hope you are. Next, and so this is my kind of last shout out then, so Aisling, here she is, Aisling Cahill, has been a busy lady over the last few months. She's been reaching out to companies across Ireland. We call it the Dublin Host Parks because some of the companies we're working with don't operate across the country, but of course it really is Irish Host Parks, so please don't feel like we've excluded anyone on purpose. It's just that some of the companies are only based here. We've got 25 companies who have put together special discount offers exclusively for Airbnb hosts. So some examples of that would be from the sharing economy, we have GoCar. We've got cleaning services, we've got laundry services, we've got something called concierge services, or guys who help you with key exchanges and that kind of thing. What we've really tried to do is ask ourselves, what are those pain points in hosting? I know for me it was laundry, right? Anybody else? Laundry? Yeah, it's really annoying. There's loads of it. So we thought we might make it a little bit easier for you. And so we've got some discounts on some laundry services and some linen services, okay? So please go to blog.airbnb.com/Dublin host perks. I will send that to you, so don't worry. And check out what we put together for you there. Last, because this is the last time I'm gonna grab the microphone today, I just want to see where Chloe is. Chloe? I don't know. Is she missing? She's probably missing, so then she'll miss this. Oh, she's right there. There she is. Chloe is the amazing project manager behind Oscailte, and she did an amazing job today. It's because of her that you guys are all here. She looked after every detail, and yeah. It's the last time I'm going to talk to you today, so I had to get that in. Thank you for everything.